And our first item is public comment.
All right, first, I'd like to welcome up Mr. Sean Cornwell. And I'll have a quick preface here and then pass it over to Dr. Melinda Reinvan. But we're excited to present Mr. Cornwell to you tonight and to introduce him in his next leadership position in Issaquah and as the principal of Cougar Ridge Elementary School. I just want to note that we had a very competitive pool of applicants, and our internal team member who has been working in the district for quite some time really rose to the top. And it's really powerful to know that we have great people in our system who are ready to take on that next step and take the charge of our leadership and take us into the future. So I'll pass it to Dr. Reinvan.
Melinda Reinvan, Executive Director of Elementary Schools. I'm happy to share that as of July 1st, Sean Cornwell will be the new Cougar Ridge Elementary School principal. As the Cougar Ridge community discovered through the hiring process, Sean epitomizes the Bobcat way, which is exactly what the staff and families are looking for there. Sean had professional experiences in Arizona, Colorado, and Idaho before joining Issaquah in 2013, where he started here as a sci-tech teacher. He has taken on various leadership roles, such as dean and assistant principal at other Issaquah elementary schools. The Cougar Ridge community is very grateful that he threw his hat in the ring as their leader, and we are all very excited to see him in this new role. Sean Cornwell.
Am I allowed to touch the microphone? I don't know all the protocols. I don't know. I was half expecting some like play, walk up music, maybe some get off music, maybe. I don't know. I am so grateful to Board of Directors, to Superintendent Tawiak. Thank you so much for the opportunity to continue to be part of the Issaquah School District in a greater leadership capacity. I'm passionate about what I do, and I'm excited to take that passion with me to Cougar Ridge as I take on this new role. It was just almost 2 years ago that I was here giving a similar speech, if you would call it a speech, I guess, in an other leadership role. And I was grateful then, and I'm grateful now. And I'm humbled to be part of this school district. It is a fantastic school district. I worked in many school districts, and Issaquah has become my home, and I hope that it will continue to be my home for a long, long time. I've also had the opportunity to meet I'm busy doing other work right now, but I've had some opportunity to meet with some of the Cougar Ridge staff and even some of the parents and their enthusiasm, excitement for what they're doing over there has got me excited, and I'm excited to jump in and to be part of the Cougar Ridge community and to continue the great work that they're doing in that community. And I can't wait. I want to get over there and just start meeting some of the kids. So I can't wait for that time to come up. And so I just wanted to once again express my gratitude and thanks for this opportunity. And I look forward to our continued partnership and working to make Issaquah School District and Cougar Ridge the best that it can be. Thank you.
Waves. Yeah.
Cheers. Can I
Thank you.
shake
Yes, please. Thank you.
Well, we are excited for Cougar Ridge, so thank you. More public comment at this point. Dave Young, if you would again state your name and attendance area into the microphone, we would appreciate it.
I'm a little shorter, so great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Young. My wife, Terry, and I are Just Serve specialists for the greater East Side region. And our purpose is to promote awareness and use of the Just Serve website. So I have three objectives tonight. One is to introduce this concept of the Just Serve website, which was recently created and is maintained by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It is a free service, and it basically helps organizations who need volunteers post their projects, and it assists individuals who are seeking service opportunities to find those opportunities and make the connection. So it's essentially a matchmaker function. It does not discriminate based on race, religion, gender, ethnicity, or sexual preference. It encourages community volunteerism. And some of the local organizations currently using Just Serve include Pine Lake Middle School, Kid Vantage, Issaquah Food Bank, the Math Agency, Mama's Hands, and there's many others. Organizations basically provide to me what they want to post, and I basically post the projects on the website. We'd invite you to check it out. It's just justserve.org. My second objective is notification that I plan to use my Peach Jar account soon to distribute a flyer to notify ISD students and parents, staff about the Just Serve website to be fully compliant with ISD guidelines. This is a poster we created. So I imagine the flyer will look something like this. Just basically, are you looking for ways to serve your community? You know, QR code plus the website. So the other third objective is to request if someone in the ISD administration could possibly identify a SME point of contact within ISD that coach me on how to best use the ISD PCHR process, that would be tremendously helpful. My phone number, got it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And congratulations for being voted or ranked #1 in the state school district. Great job.
Thank you. Next is Andrew Kim. Again, if you'd state your name and attendance area.
Hello, my name is Andrew Kim. I'm a junior at Issaquah High School, and I'm part of the Issaquah Sustainability Ambassadors team. So I first off want to give thanks for giving us this opportunity to speak again. And our purpose is for the Issaquah School District to seek to minimize our impact on the environment by using our student recommended sustainability policy. And our vision is for all students to graduate educated for a sustainable future in order to solve problems and make decisions at the intersection of ecological, economic, and social systems. We have a recommended 3 pillars of sustainability, and our first pillar is district resources, where district resource decisions can improve sustainable conditions measured in alignment with the greenhouse gas reduction goals and sustainable actions determined by the cities of Issaquah, Sammamish, Newcastle, and Renton. And I'll pass off to my counterpart, Zoe.
Next. Zoe Deering.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zoe Deering, and I'm a junior at Gibson High School and also part of the Sustainability Ambassadors Issaquah School District team. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for everything. We know that you guys are super busy. It's the end of the year, graduation's going on. There's also a bunch of other stuff that is also really important for the school district to have in all of its buildings when it comes to the bond and all of that stuff. So we just wanted to thank you guys a lot for giving us your time. So Andrew talked a little bit about the first pillar. I'm going to talk a little bit about the second pillar. So the second pillar is about environmental safety, which is consistent with the district's obligation to keep students and staff safe. The district will prioritize environmental safety in all district buildings to manage for resilience, accounting for changes in weather patterns, air quality, heat waves, flooding, and other health conditions. And this can be done by a few different ways that we have listed in our recommendation policy, which you guys have been provided. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Next, Sienna Gould.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sienna Gould. I am also a junior at Gibsonac. And first off, I wanted to reiterate our gratefulness to you all for being open and willing to talking with us. You guys being receptive to this is what inspires us to keep working towards it. So thank you. That also goes really well with our third proposed pillar, which is collective understanding and student voice. Consistent with the district vision, the connection between individual and collective choices, actions, the physical world, and equitable outcomes for all people will be emphasized throughout student experience, including curriculum, instruction, student activities, and services to students. The superintendent and board will create opportunities to provide student input into the design, implementation, review, and revision of sustainability work in collaboration with other stakeholders. District staff and volunteers will encourage student voice and agency by developing student exercise and support student-driven sustainability activities and projects that align with the city climate action goals. Thank you.
Thank you. And Matthew Fisher?
Hi there. Yeah, thank you so much again for the opportunity to speak. The board's receptivity towards this sustainability policy just again highlights that our district is one of the best in the state, and we wanted to say a big thank you for that. In terms of implementation of a policy, we want to emphasize the importance of engaging community members and students in terms of developing this. And we believe that the possibility of doing this in an advisory committee, maybe not to the scope of the bond advisory committee with over 80 people, but even a group of 10 to 20 students, community members to provide input on this important topic. And yeah, reiterate, thank you for engaging with us and being receptive toward this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public input in the room? No. Any on Zoom? No. We've been busy this afternoon, so board, you might not have seen, but Bethany and I crafted a response to our students, letting them know that this would be a topic in our August retreat. As it seems fitting as we go up to redo our policy governance to coherent governance and look at our outcomes, that would be a perfect timing for us to talk about that. So the last thing I want to say in public comment is yesterday was Administrative Professionals Day, and we would not be able to do the work we do, even the past 2 hours prior to the start of this meeting, without the support of Bethany and Nancy. And so we just wanted to publicly acknowledge and thank you for all the work you do to support us, not just here, but all the stuff behind the scenes and all the stuff that people don't see every day. So thank you. Here. And with that, the next item on our agenda is approval of the consent agenda.
I move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Nope. Next item is establishment of the regular agenda. Are there any changes, Superintendent?
Nope, there are no changes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. First item on our regular agenda is the previous hour. We had a linkage with the Issaquah City Council and their staff and wanted to open that up for reflections, comments from board colleagues and superintendent.
So yes, good opportunity to connect with Issaquah, the full Issaquah City Council, as well as mayor, as is a practice of connecting with other officials. It's great as an Issaquah resident to get to do that, to talk with the city that I live in today. I think it's a habit that was a bit more in place prior to COVID, which disrupted just about everything, including some of those connections. So I thought it was great to have had some topics that were put together by the district admin and the city admin on what are some, like the start of discussions that we can be having together, the start of projects that will benefit our broader community, that are logical places for the city and the school district to be collaborating. So I think it's maybe along with the handshake, congratulating a new principal. It's another sign of we're returning back to some of our more traditional practices. So I look forward to our continued work together. I obviously, anything we can do to make Issaquah, where I happen to live, in the district better, is exciting work.
Thank you.
And I would, really second Director Mulling's comments too. It was wonderful to have the linkage with the city. And I think the connectivity between the city and the school district is important. Obviously, our schools play a big role in our cities. And I think as we think about the number of cities actually that traverse our district, it's a good reminder that, these conversations need to be happening beyond just Issaquah. And we have one actually coming up next month with the city of Sammamish, which is exciting. And I know just, continue to envision that broadly and how we can continue to connect with all of our cities is exciting. So some good conversations tonight, and excited to see what comes of it.
Well, I think a topic about a pool, anytime you talk about pools, it's a scary conversation. So nobody wants to commit to anything, which is fine. I understand that. Because they can be really expensive, but we as a district, our students utilize those pools. My kids learned how to swim at the Julius Baum pool. And so it's really when we talk about community facilities, it's really the gathering place. It's what creates community. And so how do we do that in a way that is fiduciarily responsible is a good conversation. And, we do have more than one municipality, and sometimes they never use the facilities in the city of Issaquah, and sometimes they do. And so when it's their tax dollars, what is the benefit to them? And we have to be able to explain that. Not that I'm opposed to that, but we have to be able to explain if I'm using taxpayer dollars for people that live in Renton for facilities in Issaquah, I need to be able to explain why that's good for them.
That's a great point.
I'll just echo the same thing. It's surprising but understandable that it's been 5 years since we've met with the city leaders, but I hope that we really do have that opportunity on a very consistent basis. Because I just thought the conversation was rich right away. We were able to identify several areas of connectivity, and being able to coordinate efforts and use our resources together is only going to help benefit our community. So I thought it was a great conversation. I look forward to more.
I would say, thank you to Wally, the city manager, and Mayor Polly, and all of the city council and Council President Walsh for the work that went into it as we crafted a shared agenda. And the first time I remember our staff and their staff doing a shared presentation, which I thought that was really exciting to sort of illustrative of the partnership and the connection that staff has had over the past couple years. And we hope to see that flourish. One of the last topics was about student employment. And I was curious, as we look in your reflections, is there any sort of like summer job fair that exists that our district hosts or that the city hosts that we know of? And if the answer is no, maybe that could be an early partnership that we could look at? Because I think if we can convene all the people who would want to employ our students for summer jobs in one place, and then students could all go there, it seems like that would be a easy, quick thing for us to further one of your goals. So
that's a great idea. Not to my knowledge, do we have something that's district wide around promoting opportunities for employment? And I think we can certainly add that to our many ideas that we are bringing forward to think about how we provide greater access for all of our students to consider what careers and employment looks like in a very tangible way now. So that's a great idea. I'll also add in particular, you mentioned the joint presentation. So in particular, I want to thank Martin Turney for his work with Jeff Watling to create that and craft that and to execute on that tonight. And then in general, the many opportunities that Tom Mullings and Jason Morris and Martin Turney have directly, as of late, also Alicia Engels as well, with respect to some of the coordination on communication. So our team has been very open to the conversations. We know that It is about increasing access and opportunity, and that by doing so jointly, you can always kind of create more than what you can do on your own. So we're open to all the ideas and conversations and looking forward to continuing those together.
Yes, and as Director Coyne alluded to, this is the thing about this is just the first in a series of these that we're doing. Sammamish follows next month, and then Newcastle follows after that. So thank you again to all the staff that worked behind the scenes to make this happen. This is no small feat to get two governing bodies together in one place for an hour. So thank you. The next item is works in progress.
Great, thank you. I'll start up with a recent event that I had the opportunity to attend with several team members as well as with directors Moraldo and Mullings. Director Gallagher was able to attend last year, but it's the conference in San Diego hosted by ASU plus GSV. It stands for Arizona State University plus Global Silicon Valley. We also had several community members attend as well. And really the focus last year was on AI, and it continues to be. And as we consider a world infused with AI, it's not just about AI, it's just the world that exists that will be powered by, fueled by, and integrated seamlessly into our work. I had an opportunity to reflect with many other folks and also learn about what the impacts, opportunities, and risks are. And a couple of highlights I thought I would share, which is that as we consider, our world infused with AI all around us and generative AI, there is a significant opportunity for us to accelerate teaching and learning and also our organizational effectiveness. But however, there's not probably one public school district or even higher ed institution that feels completely ready. And in fact, it is not readiness that we should be focusing on as our goal, but our goal is about focusing on being curious and how we can be adaptable to what the generative AI world presents for us in a way that allows us to stay within, ethical and integrity set guidelines, and really think about the values of who we are as humans and what unique things we bring to the table to then guide, leverage, and utilize AI in a safe and secure way. But some major areas of consideration for us as a school district include developing what those guidelines are and focusing those guidelines on ethical use, academic integrity, and honesty, considering the role of copyright and intellectual property as we continue to move forward and what that means for when we get output back from AI infused tools, how we then navigate the regulatory, legal, and policy landscape when there is not necessarily yet a full path. There is some emerging path, and our state has been a leader in that. And how we then navigate that when there's conflicting current policy, regulatory, or legal tensions about interpretation of how to consider when there's infraction or when there's an opportunity. And so given that rapid pace of change, we have to stay flexible and really center on values and guidelines to ensure that we're not shortchanging ourselves in that opportunity, but also maintaining focus on equity and access and opportunity for all of our students. So our main interest is to ensure that we are responsible, that we're moving forward, that we're failing forward in some ways as well, and that we are focusing really on the why that can help our work and our students, what it is and how we'll do that together. So just some of my thoughts from that conference. I do want to share an update about one of our aspects of our strategic plan, which is on organizational effectiveness, and that is around our second goal underneath that area related to how we look at effective resource allocation based on priorities and needs to support students and staff. And so over the next few years, and this was explicitly crafted in our strategic plan, we will be developing a transparent, equity-based budget framework to ensure alignment of funding to areas of highest student need. And specifically, the focus is on schools, so they can support the vision for all of our students to thrive and experience meaningful learning through effective resource allocation. This is not only in our budget guidelines by the board, but also been stated very clearly as we march through different topics. How are we prioritizing areas, and how are we then matching the kinds of resources to those areas of need? So what we are exploring right now, we've had the first year of figuring out what might be our pathway forward, and that is to develop an equity-based budgeting framework. And that is defined as distributing resources equitably based on the number of students and additional equity-based types of indicators for schools that do have the highest need. And that is an important aspect as we move towards a world of expense management, because we are in a stabilization yet slight decline in our enrollment world. So we have to utilize and look at what resources we do have and allocate them in the way that is most effective for our community. So there's a couple of phases that we'll plan to move through over the next 2 years. Right now, this past year has been understanding what our options could be, what our framework could look like, and convening an internal group to explore what our current data looks like and where we might consider how we find indicators that do let us know where there is the greatest need. And coming in August, we'll start to work in a more engagement way with our community, building off of a school board retreat, school leaders, and many others. And then looking to have implementation in the 25-26 or the 26-27 school year to be determined based on what we find out through our engagement and through our learning as we move forward. Speaking of budget, I do want to share some budget items overall. So this year, you'll notice we don't have a presentation tonight on budget. And I think people have asked this question of, wait a minute, what is happening with the budget? Because we don't see a presentation and we haven't been hearing about it in prior meetings. And so the answer is we're on track to being able to really manage our expenses based on our current revenue and projected expenditures. And in the past years, I know that this has been a series of topics on many board meetings leading up to this April board meeting, because we have had significant reductions and or reductions in force. And this year we've moved into this different world of getting past the right sizing phase of our work and continuing to think about the balance and prioritization. So we are always asking the question, and we will continue to do so, about what do we start, what do we stop, and what do we grow? So we are not presenting on the budget this year since there are no major program changes to announce. And I do want to call that out because it's an absence in our current agenda, which has been the past precedent of prior years. And we are on track to providing a budget that meets our needs for board approval in August. I want to highlight 2 exciting things from our schools, programs, in our community. Each year, Mentor Washington, which is an organization that oversees mentoring in Washington State, requests nominations from hundreds of mentoring programs for the Youth Excellence in Mentoring Award. And this award honors mentors who are under 21 who have made a tremendous contribution in the mentoring field. The winner of this year's 2024 Youth Excellence in Mentoring Award is Luke Froman, who is a senior at Skyline High School. Luke will be honored at a statewide mentoring conference in May. At the conference, the executive director of the organization will present the award to Luke in front of hundreds of mentoring professionals across the state. In addition to Luke's mentoring of an elementary student for the past 4 years, he initiated and built a successful mentor recruitment campaign to encourage other high school students to become mentors, and also founded a club at Skyline. He recently found out that he was accepted into Notre Dame and with direct admissions to the business school. And I had the opportunity to meet Luke at the Voice Mentor reception, recognizing the significant years of volunteerism that exists in our district. And I was so impressed by him. And I feel like it was a personal thing for me to be able to lift up this current accolade in honor of his contributions to the community and to the well-being of a younger student in our system. And we do have many activities, individual students and athletic accolades and awards, because we have an amazing school district and community and students who do amazing things. But I do want to highlight one particular program that continues to receive incredible success, or have incredible success and receive recognition, which is our sports medicine program. And for the 11th year in a row, our sports medicine program are the state champions. So that's a pretty incredible thing. Washington State, as many of you might know, but it's important to say out loud, is the home of the first school sports medicine programs across the nation, and to host the first sports medicine competition in the country. So our state competition is one of the largest and is known for having the most difficult and diverse state competition. So the accolade is an award and recognition is really meaningful given that context of high rigor, high expectations, and really leading in the sports medicine program efforts. So those are the highlights from me. We are going to hear a little bit about the bond planning update later, so I'll hold on my comments for that, but that has been a significant area of work in progress as well over the past couple months, which we heard about in public comment a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Superintendent? Alrighty. Our next item on the agenda is Resolution 1219, Central Administration Building and Property easements and associated agreement.
I move the board approve the termination of easements, establishment of new easement and a lot line adjustment related to the potential development of an adjacent property to the central administration building.
Second.
Superintendent.
Great, thank you. So this is an opportunity with our adjacent property to this district administrative building, and we'll welcome Tom Mullings, and then on Zoom, legal counsel Denise Stiffarm, and Martin Turney will be back up to support as needed.
Tom Mullins, Director of Capital Projects, Denise Stiffarm, Pacific Law Group. We're here to explain further and answer any questions concerning Resolution 2012-19, which is an agreement with the potential purchaser of the property next to us and some easements that are combined between the two that were there from the original development. And a little bit of history in the late 80s, early 90s, when they developed these two pieces of property, they built the buildings at similar times and tied them together through various parking easements, utility easements, stormwater easements, and I think there's one other that I'm forgetting that's in the resolution. The developer, the potential buyer of the property, approached us and said, we would like to sever those easements as best as we can. We've been working for a couple months now with them, Denise, and going through doing what we can to sever the two easements. The developer has been generous with their adjustment of the property line, giving up the parking, and the access easement over here, the access easement to the north, our secondary one, is actually on that building's property. As part of this, the boundary line adjustment would bring that onto our property. The generator building would be moved over to our property and serve us fully and wouldn't be shared with that property at all. And there's a stormwater easement that we're unable to sever completely because we don't want to, the developer doesn't want to try to separate the storm because it would cause a lot of issues for both property owners. Denise I hope I didn't go too far. Denise probably can go into much more in depth, item by item, and answer any more questions, the technical questions. Thank you, Denise.
Great. Thanks a lot, Tom. Again, Denise Stiffarm with Pacific Law Group, and I apologize I can't be there in person with you all. Tom did a really good job of providing a high-level overview, and I know there is a very large document in your packet, but I'm just going to take it a step further and try to reduce it to very digestible items. Tom referenced the access and parking easement that has been applied to the two lots. Through this agreement, and backing up just a little bit, nothing really would take effect until after the new buyer closes on their property. So this is all in preparation. It's done as a part of their feasibility, so they can make sure that this is all going to work for them for their future development. But nothing will happen until they actually close. And in some cases, nothing will happen until some other steps occur, which I'll walk through. So with regard to the access and parking, as Tom mentioned, right now, your current access is actually on the adjacent lot, and you have an easement to use that. They have an easement to use just over 100 parking spaces on district property, and the district has an easement to use about 4 to 6 parking spaces that are located on that lot 1. What would happen is that after closing, the KB Home would pursue a lot line adjustment. So essentially to adjust the line that is currently between the two properties, that would move that access entirely onto district property. And as a part of that, we would terminate that 2018 access and parking agreement. District would control exclusively your access and all of your parking on your property. So it would be a nice cleanup that would recognize your rights and preserve them into the future. As a part of that, however, KB Home would like to have an emergency access easement over that north access to their property. They plan to have a fence and a gate in that location, so it would not be a general access for the new development, but would be exclusively for emergency vehicle access. They've also asked to have a temporary construction license for purposes of their worker vehicles to park on the district lot. And they've identified up to 50 worker vehicles that would park there, but it would not be permitted for a construction access, for any laydown, or any deliveries related to their construction. So it's specifically for the limited purposes of allowing their workers someplace to park, and they would do it in the back end of the district parking lot. So again, staying out of the way from main operations at the administration center. So that's essentially the parking and access easement points of this. Now, as a part of that lot line adjustment, as Tom mentioned, right now there's a generator facility that splits right down the middle of the two properties. Both parties have access to that generator facility. The lot line adjustment would move the generator entirely onto district property, and KB Home would release any and all interest that they may have in those facilities going forward. So again, district will exclusively control that. It will be entirely on district property and make it much easier in the future for future operations. The storm drainage easement is the third component, I'll call it. It's a little bit more complicated. Tom touched on it nicely, but essentially when these two properties were developed, the storm drainage facilities crossed both property lines with both properties using that same system. After development, KB Home plans to modify the system in a way that is likely to be very minor, but it will mean that most of their stormwater is handled on their site. However, they're going to continue to permit the district stormwater to flow in the way that it does now to the storm pond located on the KB Home site, and also an outfall that exists there. What they will do is, under the existing storm drainage easement, they'll do any modifications that are required by the city as a part of their permitting, and comply with any other regulatory authorities, and all of that will be done at their sole cost and expense. After they have completed that, we would have a new storm drainage easement that recognizes the updated system, continues to allow the district stormwater to flow in the way that it does now, and then it will allocate maintenance responsibilities to each lot, with the exception that KB Home will maintain the storm pipe that runs essentially right down the center, and this will be true even after the lot line adjustment. They will continue to maintain and be responsible for maintaining that pipe that runs down the center between the two lots. They will also be obligated to pay any increased costs that the district may incur as a result of the modifications. So if there's increased operating costs, increased monitoring costs, KB Home will be obligated to pay those costs to the district. The other components of this are somewhat minor, but they're important to mention. Right now, the district has a right, it's not recorded anywhere, but it's always been recognized, to access a telephone room that's located in the Lot 1 KB Home building, and to access the telephone communications from that lot. That will go away with this agreement, but currently, the district doesn't access that telephone room or use those facilities. So it's a bit of a good cleanup in that regard. There is also a garbage receptacle on the district's property that KB Home has access to. They will be releasing all rights to that garbage receptacle. And then the two parties will also disconnect any common irrigation and electrical lines that may run between the two properties currently. By disconnecting them, it doesn't mean that there's going to be any change. It just means that each property will function separately with that irrigation and those electrical lines. So again, a nice cleanup to recognize two different owners, two different uses. And then the final piece is a future-looking piece. When the properties were developed, the city required essentially a joint maintenance agreement of the frontage along the two properties, but also along two additional properties. So that's currently in place right now, where there's some joint maintenance obligations related to planters, sidewalks, and some irrigation. What KB Home would like to do in the future is work with the district and those other two property owners in order to eliminate the common maintenance requirement and have each property simply maintain what is on their own frontage. So the district has essentially in this agreement provided a good faith agreement that if KB Home pursues that at its own cost and expense, the district would agree to that as well. So that's the overview of all of the pieces. I know it's a lot. I'm just going to pause in case there are any specific questions.
So I want to open up for technical questions and then thoughts and discussion. I'd like to have that be afterwards. So the sequencing technical questions now, I'll open up for public input and then board discussion. So if there are any technical questions.
Question on the 50 parking spots would be used during construction. So I guess explain to me, I know that would be further out and it appears that there would be capacity for that. Do we anticipate there would be any issue with that?
No, we don't. At this time, they have the right to use 108, about 100 stalls on our property. And we still have had, even when Costco was running full, we very, very, very seldom had a problem at all with that.
And because how many total parking spots do we have? Oh, it's okay if you don't.
Yeah, I can get you that.
Okay, it's fine. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And one other piece, I'm not sure, it probably says it in your packet. This is for, that building would go away and this would become 74-ish townhomes. So, okay.
Any other technical questions? Yes, Dr. Mullins.
Is there any cost associated with doing this? Any exchange of dollars?
There is not an exchange of dollars. And this is something that, of course, I thought about in terms of the district and wanting to make sure that you were getting due consideration. And the primary piece of that access and parking easement and how that's working, the district is gaining considerable value in releasing KB Home's right to continue to park 108 vehicles on the site, but also in the district gaining property and securing that access for its exclusive use. So long way of saying that I definitely have thought through, is the district in the position where it's getting adequate consideration for all of this exchange? And I do feel comfortable that's the case, but there's no exchange of any actual monetary dollars.
Other technical questions? Hearing none, I wanted to open up for public input. Is there any public input in the room or on Zoom about this resolution? No? Hearing none, wanted to open up for board discussion.
I guess I would just say it seems like it cleans up a whole lot. It's an interesting place to put townhomes. I guess that's my other thought, but it seems like from our perspective, it seems like we're getting good release of property, generator use, et cetera. So that makes sense to me.
I would just say the same thing. It seems pretty clear cut to me, and a good way to clean up the property lines for sure.
I think for me, my only thought is around the capacity in this building. I don't think we're at full capacity as far as usage of all the square footage. And would we envision needing to fill out that space, therefore utilizing those parking spaces prior to the the townhomes being complete?
I don't think we do. We can't predict. I think we have probably 25% of our capacity left to fill, if that 20-ish, 18 to 20%, I think I calculated. And the number of parking stalls, the 50 additional will get 50 to 60 on top of that will suffice. And also those townhomes, I think they're figuring 12 to 14 month construction. So that would be the window that they would be unusable.
So what would be the timeline for execution of this agreement with KB Homes? And then what would be the anticipated timeframe for when construction would happen?
When I spoke with KB Homes, their best guess was the process would be about 2 years, about a year to make it through, 10 months to a year to make it through permitting with the city, start construction. So, we would hopefully be free and clear 2.5 years maximum that homes would be built. That's if everything stays on track.
And what about when this agreement would be executed between the district and KB Homes?
I'll let Denise answer that, when the execution of the agreement would happen.
Yeah, the execution of the agreement likely will happen soon. My understanding is that KB Homes feasibility period ends, I believe, tomorrow. Doesn't mean that they will close right away, but they likely will close in the next coming months on their transaction. With the execution of the agreement, nothing immediately happens. Once they close and then pursue that lot line adjustment, then things like the access and parking agreement would be cleaned up. Once they get their stormwater modification done, then the drainage easement would be cleaned up. So the signing of the agreement before you sets everything up for those actions to occur once KB Home closes on their property purchase and goes down the road to start their entitlement process.
Seems like it would be great for us to still have visibility over this, even though this isn't our construction project. So maybe adding it to the Gantt chart that Dr. Mullins wanted you to have, so we could at least track when we got to those milestones, so we don't lose visibility of something that's 2 or 3 years from now.
Absolutely.
Any other board discussion? Anything from the superintendent? No. Seeing no more board discussion, there is a motion in front of us for approval of resolution 1219. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? No. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise.
Denise, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Have a good night, everyone.
See her a lot. Okay. The next item is capital projects and bond planning update. Superintendent.
Great, thank you. So the co-captains of our bond advisory committee are Martin Turney and Leisha Engels, and supported by Tom Mullins. So we're going to hear a bit about what has been recently discussed at our most recent bond advisory committee, and make sure that we are preparing, previewing sort of what's coming down the road with our next and final bond advisory committee meeting slated for April 30th. So a huge thank you to Leisha and to Martin, with support by Tom and many others. But really, this has been a much bigger effort, as we have had more committee members, more meetings, and lots of discussion. It's really been crafted and discussed openly about what the different options could be. And I'm looking forward to when that recommendation comes my way, and then my recommendation to you gets discussed. So we do have meetings set up for May, where we're going to be discussing further, as well as then putting forward a first and second read for a resolution as we work through that feedback. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Martin Turney and Leisha Engels.
Great. Well, thank you. And I'm going to rely on Stephen to help me advance slides tonight. Yeah, can you go? There we go. So we're going to start out actually just with a real brief update on where we are with the 2018 to 2022 critical repairs levy items. Then get into a recap of the recent meetings of the Bond Advisory Committee. We'll preview the upcoming and number 8, the last Bond Advisory Committee meeting. And then we're going to review kind of where we are in the overall timeline and our next steps. Great. So in terms of the 2018 levy projects, still working on all the remaining items. There's quite a bit going on, although sometimes the expenditure timing is delayed. So work can be happening, but we kind of get the glut of expenditures all at once. So there is a copy of the most recent status report attached to the agenda if you want to take a look at it. For the 2022 levy projects, we had some expenditures for a portable move and some safety and security enhancements. That's the things that have posted since our last update. And that one is also attached and it is on our website with the link below if anybody wants to check that out. Look at that. Okay. On to the Bond Advisory Committee update. So our last update took us through meeting number 4. So we're going to start with meeting number 5 and in the items that we covered. So in meeting number 5, we were kind of rounding out our presentation of district initiatives and spent some time talking about equity, belonging, and family partnerships. So that was kind of the last of those several presentations on district initiatives. We had a representative from Piper Sandler come and talk to us about kind of tax impacts of bonds, giving us a big overview and some of the numbers around these things. Then we started moving into the numbers a little bit, starting with kind of what is in a construction budget, how do costs increase over time, what kind of things are involved in construction. So that was a good baseline there. And then we got into getting to know our schools a little bit, which was really pulling out the information school by school for the first time and showing you an example. Now, between the 4th and 5th meeting, we had 2 opportunities for folks to visit schools. So we had 2 separate groups visit Issaquah High School, Cougar Mountain Middle School, and Challenger Elementary School. Just kind of get a look at the facilities. Obviously, they're of varying ages and different levels, so it was nice for people to get kind of get a look at that and see what that looks like instead of just seeing the pictures in the presentation. So it was nice to get that. Some of you may be here with us today. So, all right. So as I was talking about getting to know our buildings. This meeting, we pulled out an example to kind of prime the pump for the conversation. And so we showed, I believe this is the one we showed as an example, the Challenger. So there had been a lot of work done up until this point of going to each building, each facility, determining kind of top to bottom, what does each building have in terms of need, some time frames of when these things may need to be done to each building, and then some other considerations. So this was kind of that first look and let people know this is the kind of stuff we're going to be diving into in the subsequent meeting. Okay. So meeting number 6, this was kind of the diving into the numbers. So we really got into it a bit here. With a very, before we actually jumped right in, we reminded each other of our initiatives and those things that we talked about, and then spent a little bit of time about, let's talk about our priorities, as a group. What are the priorities as a group? Framing that before we started looking into some of the specifics. And then that getting to know our schools part 2 was actually having each building sheet with the detail handed out, and so people could look at that and kind of get a feel. Now this, again, going over the goals and priorities before we started getting into those detailed conversations. And we went through some committee exercises. So we had that detailed information out. We had the building by building information. You can see on here, we put what projects should be included in the next bond in response to your priorities. I put it on here twice because it was so important. But we continue to talk about those things and try to get as much information out of people as possible, right? And so we had the opportunity to have some conversations, and it was less of the earlier meeting kind of sit and get and more of a conversation. So I thought that went fairly well in terms of getting some useful information and good committee input.
Okay, so then in the seventh meeting, which was about a week and a half ago, we zoomed out when we were looking at those analysis of each building. It was very detailed as far as what needs to be accomplished in the next 6 years, what's accomplished after that, and then some alignment to some of those district initiative pieces. And so that got a little in the weeds, in a good way, I think, though, because I think as a committee, they were like, we want to collectively think about what our big priorities are and then make sure that those priorities are moved forward, and entrust that the district will decide whether this building or this building needs a security camera replaced because the camera's broken, right? And so it really gave good reflection and enabled the work of the committee to move forward on the initiatives and things that they thought were important. And so we heard that, we've reflected on that and brought some example scenarios that kind of looked at those big buckets. So there were 3 different levels, and those different levels of what a potential bond measure could look like were modeled after some recent successful bond measures, both in Edmonds and Tacoma. And they were kind of in that 600 to 700 range. And so there were a series of 3 different ones that were sampled out, just to kind of see what resonated with the committee, what some of those priorities were, and about what price range they were hoping to fall as far as that committee work goes. So here that is laid out in a little bit more detail as far as the priorities of the group, other feedback, looking at the 3 scenarios. And so moving forward with that, individuals have reflected on that. They asked some additional questions as we rounded out that meeting last week. And then we're moving forward with bringing those questions back in time for next week so that we can really get a good idea of the recommendation that they're hoping to bring to Superintendent Tauyuk. And Martin has something to add.
Yeah, just wanted to piggyback on this slide. Again, trying to take the priorities and feedback into consideration as we brought forward the scenarios. So the scenario A was kind of the, hey, everything we talked about, right? It was kind of the all without, there were several other considerations that the committee that we brought forward to the committee, but were not part of our initiative conversation or kind of the safety and security and things that we needed to as a district. So scenario A was kind of the everything. Scenario B was really the reflection of what we heard. So we began to move some things into different positions. We brought a couple of things in of other consideration. And so this was the first kind of, we heard you, we're going to try to build something that reflects what we heard. Scenario C was kind of like, okay, if we're talking about the amount of a scenario B, what are some things that could be moved around to reduce the amount of the bond? And then using that as a way to have the conversation about what folks want to see in those bond scenarios.
Perfect. So looking ahead at next week, basically we're bringing the scenario that resonated with the group the most forward with a few final tweaks, making sure that all of their pending questions from the last meeting have been answered in advance. So the Q&A will be sent out tomorrow, so they have answers to any pending questions. So that's kind of that refinement and consensus building, and then discuss the estimated tax impact for our community, and then kind of a rationale for that recommendation moving forward. So there's that alignment as the group for the group too. Yep.
And one quick comment on the tax impact, because I know that's obviously a very important part of this. During the meeting number 7 conversation, we brought kind of a surface level, what's the gist of what the tax rate might look like, right? So it wasn't very in depth. It gave enough information to perhaps make an initial consideration by a committee member. So what we intend to do at this next meeting is bring more depth to that. What's it going to look like in the years to come? What does it look like based on what our tax rate and the amounts are today? So we want to flesh that out a little bit to make sure that people are aware exactly what we think that estimate might look like.
All right, so here's what the collective timeline has looked like over the last 3 or 4 months. A series of our meetings, updates here at the board meeting, a variety of different ways that we've collected data and engaged with both staff and the community. And then we look forward to discussing more in the next 2 months as this work evolves. So here's some of those next steps as the work evolves. We'll have the final meeting next week. And then we'll move forward with that committee report to the superintendent. Superintendent will then hand it to the board. You all know these steps, but we'll share with the community as well. Then you all have the opportunity to review and discuss with the superintendent, both parts 1 and 2. So that's what the next month looks like going through May. And then into June, drafting some bond resolutions with a potential pass later on in the month. I think that's all for right now. Any questions on the process at this point in time?
Thank you for the update on how you're going to fill up our board agendas over the next few. So we appreciate that foreshadowing. Wanted to open up to the board for questions. Director Taylor.
Yep, one quick question. I just want to make sure I'm clear on the process and what I heard. So scenario A is everything, right? Like the big package,
Yes,
a proposal.
correct.
You gave that to the committee, as I understand, as a starting point, and then you heard back feedback, and that's how you got to scenario B. Is that correct?
Yes,
Or-
so, oh, sorry.
Oh, no,
Didn't mean to cut
go
you
ahead.
off. Yeah. So actually, the meeting prior, we gave the committee, what is this all going to cost? Like, what does everything we talked about cost? So we actually brought that into an earlier meeting. And then we also in that meeting said, okay, aside from that, there are some things that we've heard from the community or from others over time, and there's a cost attached to that. So we wanted to make sure, hey, if this is something you want to consider at some point, we want to make sure it's out there. Essentially, yes, the scenario A brought to the next meeting was, here's that everything version, right? So if, we want to start with what we showed you. So this is everything. Now, during those meetings and during those earlier conversations, yes, we had feedback from the committee that said, maybe, are there some things that could wait to a later bond or levy? Are there some things that could be combined, or, whatever it was? And so that's where we started our thinking on scenario B, right? So that's that first iteration of listening to the committee and saying, okay, here's how we try to make some adjustments. We may have not gotten it right, but yep, that's what we're trying to do. And then the scenario C was kind of taking the scenario B and saying, now, if you decided to move or remove items, this is one version of what that might look like.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, actually, one follow-up now. I'm thinking about it. Very high level.
Yeah.
You said you took what you heard back to create scenario B. What did you hear?
Sure.
Yeah.
So some of the things we heard were, one question was, particularly with the Clean Buildings Act and the building modernization, was, are there things, we know there's a lot of things that need to be done around the district. We know you did a lot of work to collect all this information. Are there things that are feasibly looked at as beyond this scope of this bond, that timing wise are later in the process, that could be taken up in a later bond or critical repairs levy? So Tom and I went back to the data, and we use that lens to go through almost line by line to say, okay, what is a more near term, and what are those things we could consider later on? And so we went through, let's see, do you have any?
So I would say like the big 3 rocks would be like safety. Do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So then kind of in reflecting on some of the priorities the district moved forward, I think there were basically 3 big categories if you were to look at it. And one of those would be safety and security was something extremely important to the community. And you can, this is the 10,000-foot view that I think you're asking for. And so that would be one of the big pieces. Another big piece would be innovation and career programming and in alignment with the potential new high school as well. So that would be another, like I think would say the second kind of bigger rock if you're moving forward. And then the other would be building modernization and the Clean Buildings Act. So kind of making sure that buildings are brought up to speed, that we're maintaining them, that we're having like that fiscal responsibility with maintaining the properties that we already own. So I would say those are the big pieces, and then you can kind of drill down into the details more if you like.
Yeah,
So
no, that's great. That prioritization is really helpful.
I really appreciate that you shared with us through the Friday update, the mentee slides.
Yeah.
That we got to see everyone's reflections. That gives me a real sense about what the room was feeling. So I appreciate that. Other questions from board members? While they're thinking, I have a question. Does any of the scenarios, or with any of the scenarios, are you anticipating any state match money, particularly for the new high school, which is the biggest project on the list?
Yes, so for the high school in particular, we know that there was potential for state match there. We would have to restart the process. So I believe there would be several $1 million available to us for that project, which is a plus. We're also looking into any incentive programs or any other grants that come along with things like the Clean Buildings Act. We know they're out there. We just need to know what we're eligible for and what we can really get out of it. So.
But it's not included in the budget, so that would be contingency money, essentially. That's a question?
Yes, I would consider that contingency since we don't know for sure.
Yep. Perfect. Just curious. When you have that number estimate, I mean, that would be something that we would want to know before June.
Yep.
So understanding that obviously you won't know for sure until you actually apply. Other questions? I just think we want to show to the community, as you just said, as far as like grant money for the Clean Buildings Act, that we're looking for every dollar we can find to augment our budget. And in addition to asking our families to invest in their schools and community. Director Mullings?
I suppose mine is more of a comment, and just going through the materials, they're really good. They're just very impressive, particularly the sheets by building of what's immediate and not, and having that color coded, plus the physical information about the school, looking at the layout of each of the scenarios. So I just wanted to acknowledge this will be my second time. Oh, I guess I've done levies, no bonds, but still the clarity, the information, the ability to follow along with what's here. And given the complexity of what we're doing with talking about building new buildings plus modernizing the old ones, I really appreciated those by building slides and that level of information. I think that was very well done.
Yeah. Director Coyne?
Just to tack onto that too, and part of the reason maybe why we don't have a lot of questions is because it's been so informative. I mean, we have received a lot of wonderful information from all of you, and we've been able to, digest a lot of it. And I think as I'm looking at it, some of the questions I would ask would frankly be repetitive. So in terms of what we've already been discussing, and I know more will come, obviously, once we get the recommendation. So there'll be broader conversation with the community on it. But again, just very good work, and the materials that we've been getting are wonderful. So thank you.
Director Miranda?
And I would absolutely agree with Director Coyne. I mean, that's why I feel like I've read through all of this and have a deep understanding. But what I do want to say is that for you to pass along to the bond committee as they go to their final meeting, how much we appreciate their work. We really need to get a gauge of the community and what the community is ready for, what they're willing to do. I mean, it is always, I'm very thoughtful about knowing we are spending other people's money and how we do that. And are they prepared, and do they feel that they're getting something for the value of what they're putting in? And so I know that this committee is really working hard at that and being thoughtful about that and being frank about that. And we appreciate those frank conversations because ultimately, whatever we come up with, we want it to be a solution that the public is excited to vote for. So we appreciate that time.
I was just going to close and say one more thing, because thank you to all of you for reviewing the materials in detail. If people are listening in the audience here or at home, if you search bond in the top right corner of the website, or if you go to About Us District Initiatives, you'll see the bond committee materials there. So if you want to do a deeper dive yourself, all of the agendas and minutes and all of those materials are there too. And if there's still a question pending, feel free to contact Martin and I, and we'd be happy to make sure that other people have a full understanding as well. So.
Just grab a cup of coffee and reserve some hours in your schedule because the amount of information that you guys provide is really incredible. So the thoroughness, the transparency, and the engagement. And what we continue to hear from committee members is they're so impressed with how responsive you are to questions and how quickly you can get them information. So it's really quite a reflection, even the process, on you and your team and the work that they've done. And we are grateful. Any other thoughts from anyone on the board or superintendent?
I just want to say thank you because it is, there's 2 to 3 meetings a week that happen. I participate in one of those meetings, but many more happen. And it's a real team effort. We have an internal planning team that helps deploy our resources and follow up very quickly. And Alicia and Martin as our co-captains of that internal planning group, and also for the bond advisory committee, just huge thank you because it's a significant lift. And I appreciate the additional support from all of our team members to make this focus an important part of our daily work right now.
Yeah, on behalf of all of our students and families of all of our recordly overcrowded high schools, we are appreciative of your work. So thank you. Next item is curriculum adoption process. Superintendent.
So I'd like to welcome up Rich Mellish, and on his way up, I want to share that we have not done curriculum adoption and have built our continued muscle for that, even though we were on very regular cycles prior to COVID. So this presentation really is about helping us in the community rebuild our muscle and our context for what curriculum adoption looks like in Issaquah and where we are and what we're going to be up to in the next few years. So appreciate this opportunity to give a very brief overview of this, but at least to level set before we consider curriculum over the next few months. So Rich Mellish.
All right. Well, thank you for this time. The purpose of this presentation is to refresh our memories about the curriculum adoption process and cycle, and to review the current curriculum adoption planning. Just a reminder that curriculum adoptions are a critical means for us to ensure that every student has access to learning that is cohesive and that conforms to established standards and district expectations. And that in our, prior to 2020, we ran curriculum adoptions on a 7 to 10 year cycle to ensure that each core curriculum was regularly revisited, refreshed, and recalibrated. Then in 2020, we had interruption to adoptions, and there were several that were interrupted and several more that have since been delayed because of that interruption. This year, to get us back on track, we have focused on completing the interrupted adoptions with a focus on 1 through 3 here, with 4 and 5 kind of close on their heels. Next year, we will focus on completing the remaining unfinished adoptions and some of those that have been significantly delayed. And then in the 25-26 school year, we will complete nearly all the adoptions that were significantly delayed. So then with this plan in place, by 2026-27, we should return to a more traditional adoption cycle. Okay, and then the procedures, as far as procedures go, we follow a series of steps established in regulation and the IEA collective bargaining agreement. Prior to the review of materials, we go through pre-selection steps to ensure that the adoption is in line with our district priorities and goals for program development. This process has been expanded in recent years to make sure we're leveraging adoptions to extend our MTSS systems and structures, and also to reconsider how courses support student learning and career pathways. During the selection process, we've added an equity framework tool that was jointly created by TLS and the equity team staff to ensure stronger alignment of our curriculum to goals described in EL 16. Both prior to and during selection, we have expanded the breadth and depth of engagement with students, families, and the broader teaching staff to get more input into the course goals and the materials being considered. And then finally, after materials are selected, there are 3 additional review and approval steps to ensure selected materials align with our district goals and values. Okay, that was a very quick overview so that we could use most of our time for any questions that you have.
I do have a quick question. So I was looking for Director Gallagher. I think I've asked you this question again, so before, so I apologize, but I'm just curious in the curriculum adoption process. I get what you do internally here within the district. I think it's a great process. I'm curious though, how you identify the universe of curriculum options to begin with. Meaning you have some objectives you're trying to achieve, and then there's these curriculums, I imagine, available all over the country.
Yeah.
How do you identify what all you're going to review just in that initial pass, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a combination of looking at some of the key publishers, because there's, a limited number of education publishers out there these days. We also do a review of what a lot of the surrounding districts in the region have adopted. So we just kind of plumb all of what's been happening. If we know there's adoption or districts that have done recent similar adoptions, we talk to their people and say, what did you find out there? So we really do try to network for that. And then, of course, we plumb the internet to see what's up and coming that might be out there. We look at some of our professional associations. So we have, whether it's, if it's English Language Arts has a professional association where we can go and learn about lots of the up and coming curricula. So we look at those also in those professional associations, and there are curriculum review websites that say, here are the ones that really align to the most recent professional practices. And so then we can kind of focus on ones that meet the criteria that we set out in our charter.
Thank you.
Other questions? Director Mullings?
Yep, I have a couple. One is on the I guess the cycle of time for review. So I think you said it was 7 to 10 we're moving to. Where does that come from? Is that just a best practices number? Where does that length of time come from?
Yeah, that is a very common that we find around in districts, that 7 to 10 years. With elementary, it's closer to 10 years just because each teacher teaches every curricula and you can only change so much of their job at once. So that's why elementary gets longer. With secondary, we kind of monitor as we go to be in that 7 to 10 year range, but there just comes a time when things change and it's time that curricula gets outdated. And so it kind of just, I don't know, wherever I've been, it's been a kind of more of an industry standard that 7 to 10 year range is our target.
Awesome. And then the public review.
Yes.
The only memory I have is we used to sit the books out in the district office and people could come by to look at them.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that's not how we do it anymore. So I'd love to
No.
hear a bit more about that so people can review the material.
Yeah. We're really excited about this. It starts actually prior to even screening materials, where we are trying to expand our survey out to families. In fact, we just had a reflection on that today of how that went with these last adoptions and how we could do even better this next time. Because actually that front end input from parents of what do they want the outcomes of this to be, like what, because looking at curriculum, parents, we find that they don't necessarily love evaluating the curricula, but they do have really great opinions of what they want out of the course. And so that upfront input has been super valuable. And I will say that we've taken a deep critical look at the surveys we used before to make sure that they're actually give more meaningful opportunity for input. We also did, for like the ELA adoption, we did a roadshow. We went to 3 regions in the district, brought the curricula out there, did evening times where they could live come in and ask questions. And we did a Zoom meeting during the day as well, so that those who wanted to ask questions during the day. And we're doing that during the entire field test prior to selecting the 2 finalists, or prior to selecting the finalist material. During that entire field test window, which is going to be 6 to 12 weeks, we have the material available for the public as well.
Following up on that, it would be super helpful when you add the items for approval on the consent agenda, if you would either summarize the public input that had been provided, even if there was none, say none, as well as a really brief summary of the finalists that you didn't choose and why.
Yep.
Those would be helpful because these are questions that we often get asked about by our community members because they'll have had children in elementary school that they know are piloting a curriculum and then be curious about like why one was chosen or not. Because teachers talk about it as they should, and they're soliciting parent feedback. And for us now that don't have elementary kids except for Director Taylor, we are kind of clueless to it. So that would be just helpful for us to know those two pieces of information that would allow us to be informed.
And we do summarize that to the IMC, so we can share that very easily to you.
Director Morales.
I think for me, maybe I know that you're working on the middle school math, and just as a reminder, we moved to the different math levels, but we're looking at the curriculum adoption starting next year, correct? So that will, are you finding, I'm taking your field testing now, are you finding there's better alignment with that new way of doing math paths with the math curriculums that you're looking at?
Yeah, so we actually do have it at IMC right now. So we have selected a finalist, and yes, one of the criteria they looked for is supporting those pathways. So we try to make the program decisions and then go find materials that support our program decisions whenever possible.
Any other questions? Any student questions about this? This is the one of the topics that directly impacts your learning. Any curiosities? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for that. Super helpful for us to have that reminder, and certainly for our new directors to understand the process. Great. So
thank you.
Thank you. Next item is monitoring report, executive limitations 12, learning environment. Superintendent.
Well,
That's right. Sorry.
I move the board accept the monitoring report EL 12 learning environment as presented.
Second.
Sorry, Superintendent.
Apologies for jumping in. So I want to share that this has been a topic that has had a lot of discussion since I've come on board as a superintendent over the past 2 years, but I also know goes back deeper into many discussions through work studies, through engagements, through committees, and a lot of learning around what some of the best practices really are to ensure that there's consistent, fair, predictable, and consistent grading and homework practices that support a system, students from multiple schools. And so I think that there's been some, lots of learning throughout the years, and we're kind of at a culminating point. I do want to say that I'm optimistic for our work moving forward, and I want to continue to ground ourselves in that many years of learning around best practices and commitment and values to both reducing stress as well as making sure that our students are having consistent experiences, and that there's not variability in the system where if you have a student in one class and a student in another class, but the same topic area, that they're having a cohesive and consistent opportunity to learn and to show their progress in learning. So in my mind, EL 12 helps us be able to then get at the kinds of clarity around and calibration around what are our student tasks, what are the assignments that we are giving, and then what is the work product, and are we as educators aligned on what that looks like, and does that really show the kind of progress we want and the standards that we're trying to meet. And before we dive in and pass it over to Sherry Cox with some support potentially from others, Dana Bailey, we will be discussing, I want to share a couple adjustments that I have made with the team in consultation with the team as we've been preparing over the past few days to the monitoring report. I'd like to highlight those now. And so we have a red line version up available for us to review. And I'll pass this paper copy out as well. But so then we will post this retroactively to the public agenda for keeping that memorialized for public consumption, but it is on the screen here. There are 3 adjusted language points. The first is that in the originally posted presentation on page 1, we had said exception. And in fact, we do believe that we have some exceptions. Things as though. So that's actually a plural. And I know that as we get prepared for the version online for viewing purposes. We'll get to that right one. And then I want to call attention, and I will give clear directions about where to go as well, and actually read out loud some of the changes. And they're really about additions to clarify why it's not just an exception, but multiple exceptions. And if we go to page 9, section 6, and at the end of the final paragraph for this section, we added another sentence here, which is, in recognition, and I can pause for a moment to, okay, I'll read it out loud so everyone can hear it verbally. In recognition of the continued efforts at the high school level to integrate the Washington State standards for SEL, social emotional learning, in the secondary classroom instruction, our implementation in of itself is an exception because we have been focusing on different components of the total set of standards for CASEL and Washington State social emotional learning standards. So that's the first exception, or that's another exception. And then the next one I'll call your attention to is on page 11 in section 8. And it is a standalone paragraph after the first paragraph that reads, as a district, we are continuing to ensure that all students receiving special services have access to and robust support and learning with their peers. As we continue to increase and embed inclusionary practices across the system, we are still on a journey and have made progress, but do have further to go. And this is therefore noted as an exception in this monitoring report. So I do want to say that out loud, some of the changes, and it's a recognition in particular that we are constantly striving and that we have plans to continue to step into ongoing full implementation of various components of this executive limitation. So with that, I'll welcome Sherry Cox up to the podium as well. And
So before you do that, I would like to make an amendment that we accept the monitoring report as amended.
Second.
Thank you for keeping us on the straight and narrow. And thank you, Superintendent, for providing these updates timely.
I just want to double check to be sure our student is going to give the presentation on EL 12.
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for keeping us.
Hello. Okay. So hello, my name is Siddharth Basri, and I am one of the Issaquah High School student representatives. And here's my report for EL 12, which is about learning environment. So I ran this data collection process through Microsoft Forms, as many of the previous ELs have been run out, and I gave students 1 week to complete this from the 4th of April to the 11th of April. And I got 84 students to fill out the survey. And I'm just going to go like by section and give like a couple of the key points in each section. So the first section I asked was just introductory information and demographics. So yeah, so there was a lot of demographic data, but I think one interesting thing I asked about was how many AP classes and honors classes were students taking. And as it turns out, 1.75 was the average number of AP classes and 0.9 was the average number of honors classes. And then, so the next section was on grading policies. So overall, I think that the school district's doing a great job in terms of putting consistent grading practices forward for in our schools. In almost all the questions, which ranged from whether grades are an accurate proficiency, measure of proficiency, whether teachers give multiple opportunities for proficiency, and whether technology is used very well in these classes. Over around 75% for almost all these questions, about 75% of students responded positively to these. One thing that was interesting in this data was that there was quite a lot of variation by subject. I think that some subjects in some of the questions were almost like 10-20% less than the average, and couple were a couple percent more. So that is an interesting finding that I had. Couple of comments that some students gave was that maybe we should not be depending on technology as much, because kids shouldn't be on screens at all times. And some students also talked about how they might need a few more second chances on assessments. The next section was about homework policies. I know that the district had sent out a homework policy a bit ago, and we had a session on it, and this is was made to extend the data from that. So I asked in particular about how many hours students spend on homework, but this time with more concrete hours, so like 0 to 1 hours, 1 to 2 hours in those intervals. And it seems that a lot of kids spend close to 1 to 2 hours of homework a night, but not many kids spend higher than that. I think, and the other two questions I asked about this were whether students believe that teachers have clear and reasonable late work policies, and whether homework helps them understand better. So this is very similar to the grading. It's about 75% of kids responded positively to this, but there was significant variation based on subject, which is interesting. And a couple of points which are made in this section were that some people felt that some teachers give what's called busy work, which is homework that is rather repetitive and time consuming, and that does not really help them learn as much. And another students talked about, a couple of other students talked about workload balance as well, and about the difficulty of the homework that they're getting in relation to what they've seen in class. The next section would be classes at Issaquah High School. It seems that a lot of students were very happy with the variety of electives, especially in CTE and arts, which have been offered. Almost 85% of students agree with it. But interestingly, around half of students do believe that more classes could be offered. And I think an interesting part of this conversation is what classes that could be offered. So a couple of them examples which were given were those in the trades, law classes, and especially more elective science classes, especially in neuroscience, environmental science, and sustainability and organic chem. Many students also mentioned a couple of higher level math classes. And the other interesting point here was about nest and flex time. So a lot of people did respond positively that there are opportunities for them to get help. But in the comment section of this, many people did mention that the addition of homeroom has impacted their ability to get help with flex time, because there's only one flex time right now compared to the 2 which we used to have, and that might make it more difficult. Finally, I asked about mental health, and it seems that the majority of students, around 70%, do know how to access counseling and mental health supports in the school, which is pretty good.
Thank you for that. If we have questions as the session comes up, we can ask you from up here. So thank you.
All right. Good evening, directors. I'm Sherry Cox, Executive Director, Secondary Education. I think this might have been a setup. When I started preparing this report this morning, there was one exception. And now I stand before you and there are 3 exceptions. So here we go. I do want to start with the celebration. At the end of first semester, 79.3% of our 37,343 grades were A's and B's earned by our high school students. So shout out to them. And at the end of first and second trimesters, our middle school students, similar results, 80 and 82% respectively, were A's and B's. So our students are finding success. Sadly, Some of the results are predictable. We don't see the same high numbers based on race, whether or not students are in special education, MLL, and our low income categories. So we still have work to do. While there is a celebration, there's always work for us to do because we know that's not acceptable. The other thing that I would question is, what does an A mean? And so that's part of this work that we're continuing to move forward. Our shared goal as a district and a board, and I think our students and staff throughout the ISD, is equitable grading practices that encourage student ownership and agency in the process, that accurately reflect progress towards mastery of the content, that are predictable and easily communicated to families and to students, and that encourage students to set and attain goals, even if it takes them multiple times, AKA recovery, to get there. As I mentioned in the first, right off the bat, there is an exception here. And we've talked about this. We've had 2 board sessions. And while we are not where you want us to be, I assure you, we have a plan. And in partnership with school leaders, and I believe our teachers' unions, we can meet this goal, but it's going to take us to 2025 or 24-25 school year. So this is not as quick as I would like. It's not as quick as you would like, but it is in fact where we're at. Some examples of where we're moving next year is that we have created or in the process of creating a syllabus that will be identical across all courses and across all 3 comprehensive high schools. We are going to likely eliminate the minuses from our grading system. This is means there will be fewer gradients and fewer of those stress points and subjectivity points for students. So in other words, we'll have an A, a B plus, a B, a C plus, a C, etc. We're also moving towards, there's no penalty to a grade on the work that is done during the recovery period. In other words, if it takes me multiple times to get to the point where I am proficient or master a standard, once I get there, my grade doesn't get knocked down just because it took me 3 times to get there. I get the grade I earned on the assessment or on the big project. So that's the first one. I'm not going to go through this whole report because we have Ben here. The only other thing I really want to give a shout out to, and again, there's another exception there, is I really want to draw your attention to the end of this report, which is about our students in special education. I just want to give a huge shout out to Executive Director Carver and her amazing team. They served for over 2,000 students last year, which was an increase of over 20% from the beginning of the school year till the end of the school year. This team, in collaboration with our amazing teachers, serve students in ages 3 to 21 in a whole host of programs. And our building and district office staff know that all students are general education students first and foremost. We have a continued focus on expanding our inclusionary practices to ensure that students with disabilities have equitable opportunities and access to reach their full potential in the least restrictive environment. This is adaptive work, and it's happening in partnership with our school teams, our families, and our community partners. And it's hard work, but we're committed to it. And again, we're not there yet, but we're going to continue to strive to get there. And so with that, directors, I'm happy to stand for any questions that you might have in the EL12 report.
So we'll take this question and then I was going to do public input and then we'll have board discussion. But go ahead, Siddharth.
You mentioned that this district was going to remove like A minus, B minus and stuff like that. Like, could you explain how exactly this would like ease students, especially since like the lower grades still exist, like B plus and all? Like
Yes. So, I'll give the example of the student who earns a 90%, and that's an A minus right now, and is really committed to earning a 4.0. And so at the end of a semester, it's very difficult. I believe I as a teacher would have had a very difficult time being able to describe the difference between the student who earned the A minus and the student that earned the A. I mean, yes, mathematically, it's defined in the calculation in the system, but in the real world, is there much difference between a student who earns a 92 and a student who earns a 95? I don't know if I answered your question. I think I asked the question, but does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I got it. It's interesting, like some teachers already have like removed minus. I know like one teacher who has only like standard letter grades, like A, B, C, D.
And in the best practice grading research, it would be that we would move from the A pluses and minuses to just the letter grades. I think that's a big lift for us to take on when I haven't had time to do any family engagement around that. And so I like my job and I'd like to keep my job.
Alrighty. With that, we would like to invite public input. And so we currently have 4 people signed up in the room. We'd like you, given the time constraints, to honor the 2 minutes. So once you hear the timer go off, if you would wrap up your comments, that would be much appreciated. So first one is Jennifer Sarasoli. And if you'd introduce yourself and your district, area, or school.
My name's Jennifer Sarasoli. I teach English at Issaquah High School, and I appreciate your listening to me tonight. I wanted to talk a little bit about recovery practices. I think first, all of us are here wanting the best for all of our students and wanting equity. What I want to address is that at Issaquah this year, in August, we moved forward with aligning our grading practices along with late work and recovery policies in our departments. And what I wanted to do was talk about some of the complications, because I think a lot of us are a little bit concerned about having blanket policies that are perhaps a little bit inflexible and don't allow us to deal with some of the complexities involved. And so I want to share a little bit about that. So one of the biggest drawbacks that I've seen with some of the recovery work that we've done is the inability to set and enforce deadlines. Because if everything can be recovered, then nothing ever needs to be completed on time because it can be done later. And the problem is that a lot of learning, especially skills like writing that I teach, is a process. And as such, I need to provide students with developmentally appropriate structures and scaffolding for this process. And I can do this by breaking down I'm sorry, I'm so nervous speaking. I'm sorry. I can do this by breaking down the large, intimidating, overwhelming processes of writing essays into manageable steps that we work on in class each day. And students can get feedback from me as they write, and they can complete each step along the way. And they end with the experience of a writing process in which they strengthen their skills and they complete an essay with very little homework. But the problem becomes when I can't enforce deadlines, they become suggestions and students don't follow them, not because there's anything wrong with the students, but because they're human and we all need scaffolding to accomplish difficult tasks like this. And so one of the complications that I found is that my time is up, but we're hoping for some flexibility in implementing some of this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is Mary Ann Connect.
Hi, my name is Mary Ann Cannett, and I'm an English teacher at Issaquah High School. And I'm also going to piggyback on what Jen was talking about. I'm going to address recovery, but especially how it's affects engagement, homework load, anxiety, and discipline and attendance issues. And while recovery efforts definitely have their place in motivating kids who might otherwise give up, blanket policies about recovery tend to discourage kids from initially making the effort to master material, knowing that if they get a less than desirable grade, they can always make it up. We commonly hear kids say, "Why are you studying for that? You can just redo it if you don't do well." And then homework load. Homework load will actually increase for kids with this policy. Rather than focusing solely on the new material, they're also studying for material that was covered days and sometimes even weeks and months before. Under these circumstances, learning decreases and anxiety mounts. Coming to anxiety issues that kids are already experiencing because of unreasonable class and extracurricular demands are exacerbated as late work piles up. Some kids, especially those that already struggle, get overwhelmed and simply shut down. For our high-achieving kids, this redo system puts undue pressure to redo and submit work that rather than move on and focus on current curriculum. And then discipline and attendance issues. With disengagement and anxiety comes avoidance, usually in the form of missing class and or hanging in the halls. These issues are all intertwined, and most of us at Issaquah High have come to the conclusion that the blanket recovery policies are going to make it worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Michaela Nelson.
Hi, Michaela Nelson, social studies teacher at Issaquah High School. On Wednesday morning, the board met with IHS teachers to have a conversation about the EL-12 policies. During this time, the board discussed a disconnect that was made apparent that you all feel we're not on the same page. The reality is we, being the teachers and the board, are not on the same page. The language around EL-12 that has been heard by teachers on grading policies has been incredibly vague. What we have heard is a requirement for recovery opportunities for all assignments or assessments that have a significant impact on a student's grade. Here is, however, it is being interpreted by teachers. For every test, for every project, for every large assignment, students may have a way to recover their grade. According to this, if a student receives less than a 90% on their final exam at the end of second semester for my world history class, the student should have the opportunity to recover the grade, possibly by retaking the final exam, completing corrections on the exam, or demonstrating mastery in some other way. But it's the end of the school year, it's June, it's summer break. When is that student supposed to do that? Does this happen in June when the student should be enjoying their summer break, or when I as a teacher am outside of contract hours? Does this happen the following school year when the student should be focused on the next year's classes? How am I as the teacher going to be compensated for the work I would need to do to create a new test, to administer test or corrections, to grade it, and to post a new grade? How is this situation equitable for a student who may not be able to come in outside of normal school hours? The lack of logistic understanding of how this policy would be implemented is one of the many areas of disconnect between the board and its teachers. We really need to have these disconnects addressed in order for us to actually be on the same page. But if the school district truly wants equity in its schools, it needs to address the real barriers, not just the disconnects. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Jana White.
Good evening. I'm Jana White, and I'm also an English teacher at Issaquah High School. We have a lot of feelings. We've been listening and hearing about EL-12 for a couple years, and we were really told it was for recovery. That's how it was presented to us, and we are doing that in our classrooms. We are doing that in our departments. We have policies in place where kids can make up and recover when they're really struggling. So for example, in the English department at my school, students can, if they don't do well, less than 70% on an essay, they can come and meet and rework an essay and turn it in again, right? To recover, to do the learning, which is always the goal. And if kids are really, really struggling, we can put them on academic contracts and make agreements. And teachers are doing that already. So when we think about like what is mastery and what does it mean with this language in EL-12, it needs to be defined. And I think that's what some of my colleagues have been saying, and that's where we feel our struggle coming from is what does it actually look like and what does it mean? We want you to consider that it's a challenge for kids to complete and master material when they're trying to do recovery work. We also want you to know that mastery and recovery looks different in all the different subject matters. And it's defined differently in different subject areas. Jen Sarasoli talked about in English, the writing process. So multiple opportunities in English means you write a first essay, you learn from that writing, and then you write again. So they do already have those opportunities in our classrooms. And finally, we haven't really talked so much about the equity concern with this policy. We really feel like it's going to exacerbate the achievement gap because who takes advantage of the recovery opportunities is usually our highest achieving students. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public input in the room or on Zoom? Okay. Kelsey Early, hopefully you can unmute yourself. And if you'd introduce yourself and your attendance area, we would be grateful.
Yeah, thank you for hearing our comments. I'm Kelsey Early. I am a Spanish teacher at Issaquah High School, and this is my 5th year as a teacher. In that time, we have seen class sizes increase every year. Now it's normal to see 34 or even 36 students in a period. We also have more responsibilities than when I started to maintain and upkeep our Canvas page. Every year we see an increasing number of students with 504s and IEPs, and yet our clock hours do not change as our responsibilities continue to grow. It's difficult for me to complete the basic elements of my job, which include effectively planning for my classes and grading within our clock hours and the time we are supposed to be able to get all of that done. And when students are allowed to retake or redo any assessments, it actually gives us less time to be available for students. And most of those assessments cannot be redone in the 10 or 15 minutes of our clock hours after school. So all of these things require us to stay and work much longer hours, which is not sustainable for us. And I also teach a language class, and I see the same thing where when students are not required to learn the material, they end up being less successful in the class and always looking back and catching up rather than being able to grow in their learning. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Carrie Dean. Again, if you would turn on your camera and your microphone, introduce yourself and attendance area.
I've tried to. It says that it's the host has blocked it, so maybe I can try again. Oh, there we go. Now I can do it. Okay, thank you. I'm Carrie Dean, and I probably going to be in. There you go. I'm Carrie Dean. I teach English at Issaquah High School, and I've been there for 29 years. So I feel like I basically know what I'm doing with this sort of world. And I wanted to point out the fact that a lot of what we are talking about is logistics, because logistics for us are the way that this is going to impact our students' lives. And we see so much that needs to be figured out with that, so much that needs to be communicated with that. And I wanted to point out that if you're reading the monitoring report, there's this line that says this work aligned to the implementation plan that was created initially by former staff members under a different administration and does not yet meet all of the expectations set in this executive limitation. I can tell you who was here then, and it was all the teachers. And we have not been involved in this process at all. There's no conversations with us. The listening session that we had yesterday was really our first opportunity to express what we truly feel. And if we want to talk about dedication and what we are doing as teachers, things that were being praised earlier, the success of the Issaquah School District, teachers make that happen because of their commitment to kids. And we do that based on thoughtful, research-oriented work focused on students' individual needs. And you are making it so we will not be able to do that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more public input on Zoom? Seeing none. I'll close public input at this time. and open it up to board discussion.
I'm happy to get started.
Thank you, Director.
So first, what I want to start with is an appreciation for the addition of multiple exceptions to the report. I think that what we're experiencing is a gap in understanding and the lived experience across the district. And I appreciate that in my 5 years on the board, EL 12 has been in place all of those years. It was in place before I arrived, that we've had a real challenge of communicating and getting across the goal and the spirit of this policy, which is that our students, if we center on the student, should have a consistent experience as they traverse their educational day, and today they do not. As our students go from course to course, their expectations change and differ. That is what causes a significant amount of stress. And I think it's unfortunate that over the course of the last 4 years, in which it was our understanding, at least my understanding as a board director, that groupings of our staff and admin were getting together to come up with a plan, a change plan, and a step forward, that we still haven't been able to traverse that work. So I think, as the report says, we have to continue that, because what is of paramount importance to me is the students' lived experience. And as we continue to talk to students, as we did just after the teacher session, I think we have an opportunity to maybe have the students tell their story of what they experience and what is the driver of their stress in their day. And I think that was one of the things I recommended, that maybe we take 20 kids and let them tell their story about what does it feel for them as they go from class to class, from teacher to teacher, from changing expectation, from different percentages of weightings across their friends in the same courses, for feeling that they aren't sure exactly how to manage in that environment. And so I think that's a real opportunity to maybe open up that side of the dialogue that our students talked to us very eloquently just this week about what's hard for them. I think that our teachers are trying really hard to do the best things to make sure our students can reach their fullest potential. And I think our students are trying really hard to meet that expectation, but we've got something still amiss in the middle. And so my hope is that if we can focus on this gap in lived experience and center on the student, the individual student, and what their day looks like, and that may mean that we put aside some of our individual wants and needs as we go. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you, Dr. Mullings. Director Moraldo.
First, I have two thoughts. My first one is around the exception around special education inclusive services. I'm not sure I'm ready to call that an exception, because it is a move towards something and we are initiating something. So I'm not sure I have an expectation that it be fully fleshed out in its first year. So I don't know how others feel, but that's my feeling, is we're moving in a direction that I am so glad we're moving in. And I've said this before, but when we have students who need special services, but they're getting 80% of their learning outside a general ed classroom, we are teaching our general ed students that those are others, and we discard them and we put them someplace out of our community. And our inclusive practices are really about saying, you are one of us, you are included in this community. And we need our students who don't need special services to see that part of their community needs additional support sometimes. And so I really appreciate that work. I didn't anticipate it to be completely vetted throughout the entire system in the first year. Really being intentional about that. So I'm not sure I would consider that an exception to me. That's just I language, as Sydney would say. And I did have a second point around, I wanted to say that especially because the public input, we have had this over 5 years ago, so Sydney's talking about her time here. I do want to say, I recognize that we have made movements forward from the time that we had, and the purpose why the board, now that I'm the historian of the board, why the board looked at this is really looking at what was happening to students 5, even 10 years ago. I'm 15 years on the board, so I have a mindset that is different than if you've been in our district since 2016. I still have a different view of what my kids experienced, right? Which is a lot of what we as board members bring is, this is what we experienced. And I remember a former board colleague with twins saying her children were taking the same class with different teachers and get vastly different experiences. I remember having to finally call a principal because I'm like, my son's teacher in this area is asking for this kind of outside work that no other teacher in the district is asking for. Where is this in the standards? In fact, I think it actually is the opposite of the standards. So those are the kind of things that we have experienced in our system that we are trying to alleviate. So I get it. There is some logistics that we still need to work out. And to do that in partnership, any type of change management, you have to do that in partnership with every stakeholder. So I think there's still work to do there. I do appreciate the work moving forward, and we have come a long way, baby.
And before I go on, I just want to highlight. So for me, Director Morado, I agree that the welcoming, safe, and inclusive as possible. Yes. But the important part for me is equitable opportunities and necessary supports to reach their full potential. And I think when I see a 50-point gap between the performance of our special education students and our not special education students, that's a problem for me. 50-point gap. That's not, like, our gap has widened, not closed over the past couple years. And that's why, for me, that's an exception.
If it's about our special services in general, then I can understand I thought it was specifically to the inclusive practices. Okay.
It just, the first section of it, or first wording of the language. Director Coyne.
Thank you. I guess I'm going to ask a couple sort of newbie questions. And again, for the people I hope are listening, I always say that online. I know it's a small group, but in case you are and you're maybe learning, going along this with me, I just clarifying what we're reviewing, I guess, and agreeing to this evening. Is it the restating of the EL, or what Executive Director Cox had mentioned on some of this more specific items? Are we not to that? We're not to that level yet. Okay.
We're agreeing on the piece of papers in front of you. Okay. That is a reflection of remembrances and arrears. Okay. So it's what was last school year.
Okay. Okay. I appreciate that clarity.
And that's the hard part, is she's really previewing for the next school year. So we're kind of looking at 3 at the same time.
Okay. Okay. So in that clarity, I appreciate. And I guess just, an observation, and I know the work has been going on for 5 years. And I think, I was, we appreciate the breakfast that we had with our teachers and our students yesterday. I thought the conversations on both sides were great. I think the observation coming into it, again, as a newbie on the board, we had significant teacher participation. We had very few students who participated, which appreciated the students who did join us, and appreciate you for, reaching out to us on it. But for me, coming into it as a new board member and seeing the amount of teachers that were there, it's clear to me that there's more conversation that is needed. And again, it's helpful to know that this is kind of forward looking on some of these elements. And I appreciate that as a district, we're talking about all of this. Particularly, I think recovery is important, but I think that we have a ways to go to get more clarity. I'm hearing our teachers, and I have concerns. I get it. We need to offer recovery options, but I understand how that, as the demands that are on our teachers, how that can be complex. And so, again, as a new board member coming into that room yesterday, I think it was very telling, and appreciate the honesty. I appreciate the honesty of our teachers coming out. I know this is hard. I know this is tough. I say this time and time again, I come from a family of teachers. I know it is hard to come to a board meeting. I know it's hard to feel sometimes like the board is connected and partnering with teachers, but I want our teachers and ISD to know that we're hearing you. And I think we'll be able to come to, shared agreement around these practices. And I appreciate again that we're having the conversations. So thank you.
Director Coyne, can I thank you for
Yeah.
that? And I want to thank the teachers that came, because it's definitely not easy to stand here. I want to just kind of acknowledge that the teacher, so on Tuesday, I talked to IEA President Drana and WEA Elizabeth. Sorry, my brain's a little foggy. It was the first, like, hey, this is what we're thinking for next year. And then immediately that got turned around and she talked with, I think, her rep council. And so this is still a work in progress. And it's in its very baby stages as far as us rolling it out. And we are absolutely committed. Rich and I have spent time, we're holding listening sessions May 8th and 15th with teachers to talk about this work. And we're committed to leaning in and supporting the work that they will need to do to make EL 12 a reality in our schools for all of the reasons that Director Mullings, Director Moraldo has said. And so I'm not a person to just say, do it. We're here to support and lean in that process with them. And so we definitely want to do it in partnership. And Drana actually and Elizabeth said they want to do this in partnership with us because it's a value that they hold as well. And it's now just about how do we keep moving it forward to support the teachers.
And I appreciate that. Thank you. And I think that's the big thing. I think we want to communicate that, yeah, partnership is important. So thank you.
And I would just say that multiple attempts to demonstrate mastery, which is a language in there, doesn't mean you have multiple attempts to retake every assignment that you're given. So a couple examples in my daughter's math class at Skyline, she's not even eligible to retake the math tests unless she's done all of the math homework, which makes sense to me. As an example, if you're thinking about language arts, you could say, as an example, luckily this isn't our negotiation, this is your work. All of the formative parts of your essay have to be done and turned in on time before you would be eligible to retake or to rewrite the final the whichever essay that you're building towards. So I think you can have the accountability piece built in to it. So you're assured that the daily work that happens and that needs to happen in order to have the learning happen, because again, we're not trying to create extra workload for our teachers. What we are trying to do is to decrease the high stakes stress that our students feel and are experiencing. And they shouldn't have to walk into every math test or every Socratic seminar or every essay and wonder, wow, I have to hit this out of the park. Otherwise, I'm not going to get to go to the University of Washington. Like, they shouldn't be having to have that fear and that worry and that stress. And I can tell you that they are. And this isn't just what we hear from our student representatives. This isn't just from what we hear from the 5,000 high school students in our school district. These are our lived experiences. This is a really unique time for this board and this generation that you're going to have 6 students graduating from board members in 5 years from Issaquah high schools. So like, we're living this all with everyone as well. So I appreciate that you're leaning into this work and that you're committed to supporting teachers. I just want people who are listening to know, like, this isn't about creating more workload. This is about finding a reasonable pathway forward to ratchet down the stress for our students so they can see that they can achieve and that they can know and challenge themselves and take courses that they may not want to otherwise, but knowing that it's not going to kill their grades or GPA. Yes.
I attended the listening session Wednesday morning with the board, and I was able to discuss with several students as well as the board members some of the student concerns and experiences about homework and grading. I wanted to add on to Director Coyne and Director Mulling's comments. I do think that having a listening session between students and teachers would be extremely helpful. The listening session Wednesday was extremely beneficial and like a great learning experience for me. And I believe the other students that attended as well, on just like students' experiences and being able to share our worries, our concerns, and suggestions. And we were also able to talk with the board about some of the teachers' experiences because the teacher session was before the student session. And we were able to learn a little bit about that. And I feel like listening now to the teachers' public comments and just this teacher side of the story, I feel like would be very beneficial to both teachers and students to be able to share our experiences with each other, because within the classroom, we aren't given that opportunity very much to communicate with our teachers our needs, specifically because there's so much content to get through and because teachers already have so much work they have to get through. Having a video of students' inputs would be nice, but I feel like what would be even more beneficial is student and teacher back and forth, having active discussions and learning. And then adding on, I would wonder if there was an alternate to recovery. We've talked about this a lot. Obviously, there are concerns with the workload of having recovery work for both teachers and students. I would wonder if, rather than recovery, is there some other option to get students to learn mastery, to demonstrate the mastery, and to maybe boost their grade or like prevent them from failing the class, maybe through extra credit work or even just having additional resources or sharing of resources for tutoring or study groups that would help the student perform better in that class.
That's a,
Sorry.
did you want me to answer or?
Sure. Yeah, let's just keep this as a dialogue.
Yeah,
And
I
then,
mean,
and then we see your hands as well.
Thank you, Naomi. Like the brilliance of our students, right? Like if the teachers and the students could have these conversations together, great. To answer your question about different recovery options, Rich Mellish, our teaching and learning expert, is actually creating a website for teachers to look at all of the different ways to utilize recovery opportunities for students. And so it doesn't have to be rewriting the entire term paper. It might be just that your introductory paragraph was weak and that's the part that you would rewrite, or it might be just a certain concept in your biology class. So he's working on putting together some resources for teachers so that when they are looking for recovery options for students, there's a multiple ways to go about that.
Thank you for that answer, Aditi.
So I just want to share where I stand on this recovery, I guess, policy. So I definitely benefit a lot from recovery opportunities. I think that that's one of the most amazing things about some of my classes is the fact that I get the chance to improve and to attain that mastery. But what I will say, though, is especially for classes that the content builds upon the previous lesson, I will say that, let's say on Monday, I learned lesson, let's say 10.1 in math, for example, and the quiz for that was on Friday, and I didn't do so well on that quiz. So I made the quiz up the next Friday. But throughout that whole entire week, between that first Friday when I took the quiz and the next Friday when I made up the quiz, I'm learning new content. And if I didn't learn the first content appropriately, if I didn't get mastery on that first piece of information, then I'm just going to be piling myself up and I'm not going to be able to understand the rest of the information. And so I think while recovery is extremely important and valuable to me and I benefit from it a lot, I think there has to be some sort of line between, can we achieve mastery within a reasonable amount of time so that it doesn't pile up like that, so that I don't fall behind, and so that I'm able to achieve mastery for all topics instead of just focusing on the previous topics and then getting stuck with the new ones.
Yes, great point. I think our teachers would feel the same way. Yeah, Hava?
I'd just like to comment again, because I have before, and there have been discussions before on this. But the word mastery comes up so many times in the ELs and so many times in these conversations, and it is still not quantitatively defined. And I wouldn't assume that there aren't people working on defining that and there aren't conversations happening. But considering how many times in the past couple of months the concept of defined mastery has come up and how important it is to our students. It needs to be defined because you're talking about the way that you want your students to learn. And if you're using this word in passing, that in passing, you know what it means, but you can't actually tell any teachers or students what it means. Or even what it means student to student, like with special education students, and how we address their mastery and how their needs are met in mastery. If you can't define that, you're not actually going to make any progress. And I would encourage not doing research on other educational programs that focus on mastery and how they address that. Ask students about their understanding of mastery, not necessarily to find right answers, but to understand where they're at. And maybe you will find some answers there, and to ask teachers and see the differences and the similarities in their answers, because that is the most important thing, is actually being able to tell us what we're supposed to be doing and explain and have clarity and transparency, because the district is really good at having transparency and communication, but not when we don't know what we're talking about. So thank you.
Thank you, Hava. Director Rhonda.
I think Hava brings up an important thing, and of course, coming from Gibson Neck, where mastery does mean something different. And what are you mastering, I think, is the other half of that question, Hava. Because at Gibson Neck, you are mastering quantitative reasoning, right? You're not mastering, was I able to determine X on this problem? And so part of the problem is the assessments and what is being assessed at the comprehensive high schools are different than what's being assessed at Gibson Neck. And I think that is difficult because we're using the language similarly, but what we're assessing is different. We're not assessing standards, we're assessing work product and outcome. And so I think that is difficult. So how have I mastered writing this essay, or have I mastered, creative thinking or creative writing or language acquisition, or what are the pieces that through all that have I learned? And so I think there is this difference, but what is mastery and what are we mastering?
Director Taylor.
Okay, I'm going to try not to randomize my comments too much. As to the document itself and all that, great of it. There's evidence here that, the district is making progress in key ways, and that's great. I really am going to talk a little bit more about just where my mindset is on this issue, homework and grading. And I'm going to echo a lot of what Director Coyne said. And I think maybe there's something meaningful in that we being the two newest members, that I think are seeing things in some similar lenses. And since I've been on the board, my very brief tenure, this topic has been the one that has gotten the most attention, and that I think we have spent the most time on. And I don't want my comments to be perceived as that I think we need to have already come to a conclusion, but I do not necessarily feel that we are any closer to the solutions to these issues that we brought up during our retreat or anything like that. So having said that, the inputs that we are getting are great. I found the survey from the students very, very, there's a lot of great information in there and things that I was not aware of. I think the sit down that we had with students on this week was even more enlightening to hear about their kind of holistic experience in the system. Very helpful. The breakfast with the board with our educators that we've been having is incredibly important to me as well. I think that is input that we definitely need to be considering, and I know we will. And there are certain themes there that are surfacing that are becoming top of mind for me as well. So I say all that just saying it's very nuanced. There's a lot to consider, but there are some things top of mind for me that I just want to raise. I've heard how should I say this? I'm hoping we have a continued discussion around cell phones and cell phone policy. We definitely heard that from the teachers, that cell phones are a distraction in the classroom, and how we want to deal with that moving forward is something for consideration. I found it even more enlightening that when we talked to our students, they said the same thing. They said undoubtedly kids are distracted in the classroom by their devices. And now how we want to deal with that issue, you know, that's for further discussion. Is that classroom by classroom policy or a district policy, what have you? But anyway, also I have some concern around the self-selection of courses process, only from the standpoint of, I have heard now on several occasions that we have kids out there that are self-selecting 4, 5, 6 advanced courses at a time, at which point we are just setting them up for anxiety and stress in their everyday life and very large homework loads. So I'm wondering maybe if there's guardrails there that would make some sense. And then the two biggest issues, it's a broken record, recovery and then mastery. The recovery issue, I completely understand the need for it, and I'm supportive of that, but I do have concerns that that can be taken too far. And that can lead to unintended consequences. So I just want to be mindful of that, you know, we say in the EL-12, we say we want robust and rigorous learning experiences.
Yes.
And I think if we, I think if we go too far on that, we might, you know, move past the objection. So that, and then on the mastery thing, I'm actually gonna, to what Hava had to say. We also say in EL-12 that we want, that there should be other ways to exhibit mastery during a course. I'm not exactly sure how that's possible if we say mastery is 80% in the course. How is the other way you're going to represent mastery other than 80% in the course? I brought this up in our retreat before. There is an arbitrary nature there to me between a traditional grading process and the concept of mastery. And I just want us to continue to have discussion as to, do those two marry? Or if we talk about mastery, do we need to think about how you measure that in a maybe non-traditional way? So those are just my thoughts to kind of continue us along the line of the discussion that we've been having. And again, like I said, incredibly nuanced. I'm learning a lot. And I guess that's what I have to share at this point.
Director, can I answer a question that's come up now twice about the definition of mastery? While we hesitated, I think for 5 years to define mastery, the language in the policy does say mastery, and I've heard us use the word mastery and proficiency interchangeably, which I think we would all agree that they're not the same. And so I, in partnership with high school leaders and others, 90%. So if a student earns less than a 90%, there should be an opportunity for recovery on assignments that significantly impact, whatever the substantially impact the grade, the final grade. And so it's kind of a default definition, but I mean, you're all parents, and if your kid wants to strive harder to earn the A, who am I to say that they shouldn't have that opportunity to earn the A? And so I'm going to propose with our teachers that that's the definition of mastery is 90%.
Got it. Is it all right?
I think when it comes to the definition of mastery, like, the way I've always thought about it is like, are you able to teach the concept to another student, for example? Like, if you are able to teach it to another student, then that means that you have like immense control of the subject material, like enough to teach it. So I think it's another curious question, like, would 90%, like, would that number actually represent people who would be able to, like, be able to do that?
That's a great question.
Naomi and then Director Mullins.
Just building up on this topic, is that definition of mastery, is that still under debate or is that set in stone for now?
I'm open to input always.
Yes, because what we've talked about before, mastery can mean different things for different students. A lot of our classes define, or like you're talking about 90%, but 90% of a grade, much of that comes from taking tests and scoring well, but not every student is very good at taking tests. Some students perform better with presentations or projects rather than test taking, which is a high stress situation for many. So what we've discussed before is just like, how do we define mastery in a way that better fits all variations of learning so that every student can demonstrate their mastery?
I agree. We need to have multiple ways for students to demonstrate their mastery, not just written tests. Thank you.
Director Mullins.
I think for me, what's most important, back to the Gantt chart on some of our building and construction projects, is that we lock in on what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. And on this topic, we have allowed ourselves to meander and be distracted for multiple years. And again, I will state my intention, which is to create an environment where students can understand their accountabilities across the multiple classes they arrive at. And if we can keep that center and and maybe we need to time box ourselves into when we can get to some of these decisions, or maybe we need to leverage this moment of heightened interest in the topic to have people motivated into discussion. But I think what's most important to me is, I know the document says 2024 to 25, but what I'm gonna want and need is something a lot more specific than that, which are what are the key decisions we have to get to in order to get to that consistent environment, and in what order and in what time frame those decisions will be made. And I have very little interest in prescribing what the answers are, but I actually think that's maybe been a detriment of the board's position for the past 5 years in wanting the organization to get together, the knowledgeable people to make those decisions. And so my hope is that we can leverage this moment of increased interest and passion to be very specific about what decisions need to be made. If it's 90%, I love it. Let's do that and let's put it on paper. If it's logistics around, it must be a certain amount of whatever the criticality of a deliverable or a project is. But I think what's important is we've gotten so fixated on some of these topics. One of the multiple opportunities to demonstrate mastery is actually what Naomi just talked about, which is how are we allowing students to express their knowledge in multiple ways, not just multiple times. That's the creativity I'm still not seeing. So is it that I can do my project verbally? Is it that I can do my final in a test? Is it that I can have a different way to express my understanding, in ways that fit my learning style that I don't think we're representing? So I understand the concern about logistics. I think that's decision-making and speed to decision-making. What are hard edges in our calendars? What are critical? Part of it is aligning what's in our grade books so we can get there, which we aren't to yet. Part of it is aligning to how we demonstrate mastery, which we still aren't there yet. So I think I just want to be really clear that for me, what's most important is that we stop this meandering, decide what are the key decisions, make them, and give them a time at which they'll be done and who gets to make them. But we have to get there.
And for me, it's less about getting there so someone has a better transcript. I actually don't care about that. I care about youth mental health crisis that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we as a system have to do everything we can do to prevent and decrease that. And when our Health Youth Survey from this year says that 1 in 4 of our seniors is clinically depressed, that's a problem. When 1 in 8 of our seniors has contemplated suicide in the past 2 weeks, that's a problem. we have to own that, and we have to own our parts. And part of our parts is decrease and ratcheting down the stress. And I think we also have to dissociate. Rigor doesn't mean more work. It might mean different work, but it doesn't have to mean more work, and it doesn't have to be piled on. And so when I hear teachers say, well, they've chosen to take 3, 4, 5, 6 AP classes, that doesn't mean that there has to be more work necessarily. Now, for some, it might be the case, but in general, there doesn't have to be a direct association between rigor equals more work. So what drives me and why this one also includes SEL and why that's so important to me is because we know that with the rising use of smartphones and back to cell phone use, it's not just about when it's used in classes and how disruptive it is. It's disruptive to our students' lives, period. And so I'm not saying that homework and grading policies are why our students are in a mental health crisis. No, but I'm saying that that is one part of the puzzle, as is cell phone use. And I think we as a system need to do a better job of educating students as well as families through SEL on like what is the impact on youth mental health. And the more our students use phones, the worse their mental health is. But I don't think that if we were to survey most of our high school students, that they would understand that connection. And yet they understand so clearly the connection between if they smoke, that's bad. So I know we know how to get lifestyle messages out, but we're like, that's why SEL is such an important thing, is because it's not about like oh, let's just all have kumbaya. It's really what life skills and what impacts to their life and interactions with others and their thoughts about themselves really will help and equip them for the next step in life, whether it's career, college, etc. Siddharth?
So I want to say two things. So like I think going back to the idea which we were talking about, like multiple ways to demonstrate mastery. So on the survey which I sent out, that was actually one of the questions which I asked. And I think that it was interesting that like for subjects like English, where there are multiple opportunities like with like that. Like I think we mentioned presentations and projects. I think there are the English classes, at least the ones which one which I took last year and the one my brother is taking right now does have both like written skills like essays and oral presentations as well along with it. But like I think in English that might be very appropriate, but like a good question would be like, how would we do that in a subject like math, where only 55% of students agreed that there are multiple ways to assess mastery. And then so that would be a good question, like, is it even possible? And I mean, it could, and like if it is, like how would we do it? Like we probably have to be pretty creative about that. And I think that's a very interesting conversation to have.
Me too. And the answer is yes, we can do it in different ways. And that's what our work in the district office is, to help teachers learn new ways to do that work.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to ask is, so like, I think we talked about mastery and like its definition. So the other term which I've heard being called up is rigor. And I think Director Gallagher made a good point about like how rigor should not be 6 hours of coursework every single day. Like that's not rigor. And I think that maybe rigor would be like it goes deep into the material and maybe encourages you to like connect between different chapters, for example, and maybe encourages you to think like deeper. Maybe that would be what rigor would be. But I think that's another like definition question which we need to answer.
Naomi, and then Director Coyne.
I know we're jumping around a lot, but I wanted to comment on Director Gallagher's comment about cell phone usage in classrooms. I believe, and like just social media and cell phone usage in general, I believe students in this generation, at least, or at least from my experience, are quite self-aware. They know that social media is detrimental to their homework. And we've discussed this in the listening session. We did say like, oh, sometimes I do like go on social media. I get lost on TikTok or Instagram. I believe that students are aware that cell phone usage is detrimental to their learning. But oftentimes we see no other option to ground ourselves, or we want to take a break and we just want to like maybe 10 minutes. So then we go on social media. I think students are aware that cell phone usage is not greatly beneficial to our education, but we don't need that repeatedly drilled into our heads. We already know it. We've had it told to us several years already. What we need is other options taught to us, how to better manage our time, how to help us not look to our cell phones as the first tool to use to distract ourselves from our real world problems, rather than just don't use your cell phone.
That's super insightful. I really appreciate that a lot. Judge Coyne.
Thank you. I'm struggling with the conversation around mastery and coming up with a definition. And I think we likely need to come to something, but I guess where I'm struggling is to put a number there for multiple reasons. I'm a believer in providing recovery options, but I'm in my head where I struggle with saying 90%. And I'm in the throes of this with a child who's going to be who's a rising senior and looking at colleges. And I worry that we're going to tip our hat a bit to higher ed. Higher ed's going to say, okay, an Issaquah A is an equivalent to a Lake Washington A or another neighboring district. I want to be careful with that because I am hearing that from universities who are saying they believe, there's been a level of grade inflation because of the pandemic. And I don't know how much of that necessarily is true, but I worry that by saying 90%, it potentially, it gives the idea that maybe our intention is to graduate everybody with an A. And I want kids, again, to be able to have the option for recovery, just worry about giving that number. And I understand on the flip side, again, if you're a college-bound student, you're looking at needing that A. I mean, if we're looking at our benchmark school, the University of Washington, to get into it, it's literally a 3.9, 4.0 or higher. So it's tough. I mean, we're kind of walking this fine line with it. If that's our benchmark, it's tough. Kids are seeing that. That A is very important. But then I struggle too, because I want to make sure that kids really who are getting the A really got the A versus, everybody getting an A. So, and I'm not saying I have the answer to this. I'm just reflecting, on this. But I guess at the end of the day, I struggle with putting a percentage on mastery.
Yeah, and I struggle too. And a couple things. I don't think that just because a student took the recovery opportunity to earn the A means that that's grade inflation. I believe that they have demonstrated that they've learned the content and it just took them longer or a different means to get there. So that's the first thing. And I landed on a percentage because, and I'll say it wasn't me, just me, but we have in our system, we have some that say, if you get a 60%, you don't get a recovery option. And then we have others that say you can do a recovery option for whatever you want. And in best practices in grading, it should be the latter, although I do think that then increases stress for some kids. But because we are all over the board as a system, I needed to bring us somewhere together. And I mean, an A is as high as you can go. And so once you hit 90%, there shouldn't be any question whether you mastered it or not. You've mastered the content. Because to me, it's about the learning experience of the students and the predictability across the system. And so I hesitated to land on a percent, but I needed to land on something because I cannot have a 60% content area, a 75%, an 83%. It's too much and it's not fair to kids.
Agreed. Dr. Mullins.
I would love to maybe move us back to the actual report if we could, which would be amazing. And yes, that was my love language, that last piece, because we are all over the board and we need to acknowledge that. I think we struggle to acknowledge that we're all over the board. But Director Moraldo, you raised a question on whether this exception should be an exception. And I guess I feel like I want to make sure we run that to ground before we get to an actual approval decision. I think I'm feeling a bit torn. I am appreciating why it feels like this document more closely represents the lived experience of having the difference of performance in the large and growing gap of performance with students receiving special services. But I did want to come back to that point you were making.
Well, and so I wanted to be clear that it was my understanding that the paragraph was about the inclusion practice, that was not equitable across the system. But if you're talking about our special services happening across the system or our students reaching mastery. So I guess that to me, because I would agree with you, Director Gallinger, that clearly when they're falling 50 points below their counterparts, we're not serving them. But I don't know if that's what this document is saying, or is this document talking about the equitable practices across the system, to which then I would sit back and go, I'm not sure I'm ready to say, well, because you don't have the same inclusionary practices across the system, then it's an exception. So I get, for me, I need clarity. And it's great that we're coming back to this, because I actually needed to say our first discussion should be around the amendments, and we vote on whether or not we approve the amended language. And then we can have a discussion about the package as a whole. But
Director Meraldo, are you making us start over?
no.
Thank you.
I think it's on this point, I wanted to share a bit more on my mind, that I've had different conversations today with colleagues, but the ideal state of having a more inclusive environment would then drive us towards an ability to have all of our children reaching their full potential, especially those who are receiving special services. And really, I think the question, as I interpret sort of this discussion about whether it's an exception or not, is that we are not where we want to be. We know we have further to go. So therefore, that's why we marked it as such. But when you look at the data and the gaps that exist in terms of achievement levels, it depends on whether or not you want that in the ends, right? Which is part of the data set versus the adult actions we're doing to drive towards that progress, to that enable the ends to be true. So I guess I want to lift up that point, because we look at the exact limitations of what we're doing to help create those conditions. And then we look at the ends as whether or not we are, meeting those particular numerical goals. And this is why governance and policy is an important discussion, because there's lots of ways to interpret it. But I wanted to lift up that difference as I was seeing it as well. And that might shift the course of this conversation or add more to it.
And that's the challenge of this. These are shall not fail language for all these. So these are items that should be met, not reasonable progress towards, which is the student outcome. So for me, just like somehow EL16 is kind of a blend, like the outcome data is what helps us identify, is the learning environment appropriate, equitable, inclusive? And to your point, it's hard to argue that it is, that we're meeting that standard when there's a 50-point gap.
And that's why we included the data as reference to show we have progress to go. So I don't want to get into a circular argument here, but
no, but I would
my
just
point.
say versus as an example to juxtapose that, if you look at page 6, number 4, ensures access to student-driven opportunities to explore non-core options, especially in the areas of CTE, STEM, fine, visual, and performing arts, providing career-connected learning. And I think here you demonstrate and show all of the access points that students have. And so I would have a hard point arguing that you're not meeting that. And that's why, so I think that's why in my mind, it's a distinct difference. But thank you for bringing us back on task.
Yes. It's all the tasks, but this is like what we got to do next meeting. So with that explanation, for me, it feels like an appropriate addition to this report, and I think it should be here. And I think it also acknowledges the work towards at the same time, which I think is good, and demonstrating that we're making the attempts. So I think both can be true in the document. I don't know how others feel about that.
You want? No?
No, I have my finger ready to vote on the amendment. So we
you're
can
going
then
to make
discuss
the
about
motion for
the whole
motion.
rest of the thing. Because we said we were going
As
to,
amended, got it.
as amended. So we just need to agree to that language.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Are you going to make the motion?
No.
I already did. I
Yeah.
already.
Is there
I
any
already
more
made the
discussion at the
amendment.
very beginning?
On the amendment.
Any more discussion on the amendment to accept this as presented with three exceptions? I see no further discussion. So all those in favor of accepting the amended, so with the three exceptions, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the amendments have been accepted. Any final discussion points on this? Parting thoughts, anything? I think I'll just kick it off by saying I really appreciate the work and acknowledgement of, hey, here's where we're doing really well and here's where we fell short. I think that transparency is something that we have as a board have been asking for. And so thank you. I know that that's not easy, but I think it shows to our community, our students, our staff, like, hey, we're not perfect, but we're willing to acknowledge and then commit to working ahead and continue on this work in partnership with our staff. I think these spring ELs are always hard because we're reviewing something from last year and we've almost finished this year. And so we appreciate that you talk about next year because next year's definitely closer than the year we're reviewing. So. Any other thoughts? Or thought it out? Okay. All those in favor for accepting EL 12 as amended, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. Any final thoughts on that since we've now finished? No.
It is a huge amount of work and effort to calibrate with each other around what needs to be true for our shared values. And so we recognize that. And so working together in partnership and through sequential steps is very important. I want to thank our team for all the work they did collaboratively. So you saw a lot of names listed against this executive limitation monitoring report. Although Sherry Cox was here to present, it was on behalf of our collective team in that regard. So thank you. And I know that this question of mastery compared to proficiency and mastery in a points-based system, and to Hava's eloquent points, is a topic for future board exploration around those different questions there. So thank you.
Next item is legislative matters. And is there any, we're in a quieter season, so there might not be, and that's also okay.
Yeah, nothing at this point that I'm aware of.
Nope. Anything from Director Moraldo?
I think that there was just something sent out about the NSBA had their conference a couple of weeks ago and they had have an automated system if you want to go and communicate your support for the IDEA funding. There's a whole just you can send a text to 52886 and it will send you a message that you can click on the link and then it'll kind of help you with the messaging for that. Because they are down to 13%. They fund 13% overall of special education when they promised 40% back 50 years ago.
As a preview for our WASA regional meeting on Monday, I'm adding a legislative advocacy part of that agenda for us to start having a collaborative conversation on how we as King County, which again, 1 in 4 school children in our state are in King County, can jointly message the importance of increasing funding to our schools, since there's a constitutional mandate for at least 50%, and it's dropped down to what, 42 or 43%. So now is the time for us to start organizing and getting together, because that way, as we go through the late summer and fall, to be able to coordinate with all of our partner PTSA, WA, et cetera, on this shared unified message to the legislature as they come into the next long session that this is inadequate. So Next item is announcements and correspondence. Are there any additions to this? I'll say again, thank you to Bethany for being responsive to those. We really appreciate it. So, next item is calendar and future agenda topics. And I don't know if you have any updates for us for this, Bethany. Okay. Then there is a change in the date for the breakfast of the board at Liberty High School. So make sure you've noted that change. And if you're available, please do make sure that you accept that or let Bethany know so she can plan accordingly from announcing a special gathering of the board. And then you'll see on graduation day, there is carve out time for an executive session that will be dependent on how graduations flow. Are there any other items that need in this?
So a quick question on the breakfast with the board at Liberty on the 15th. Is there time change? Is there a new invite that's gone out on that or?
I think it went out.
Yeah.
I have, because I saw that on the 15th.
I have it on the 15th as well.
It is
on the 15th.
Yeah, but it wasn't originally on the 15th.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's why. Okay. I've got the updated date
7:45?
then.
I think it was originally the 8th.
Oh, okay. Okay. No,
So
no worries. That got the current date then.
So is this the same format though that it is with teachers and with students?
Yes.
Okay, then I only have one,
I think that's.
which is the first 50 minutes.
Oh, can you add the second chunk with student?
Yeah, I just have, yeah, that's what I have too.
Because I have scheduled over the second 50 minutes.
As I did when had to leave Issaquah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I meant to.
okay. Thank
Other-
you.
Other
Thank you.
clarifications, anything else that we've missed on this?
As a reminder, so depending on which board members are attending and how many, we need to know in advance of the 24-hour mark to ensure that we put in a public notice for open meeting for that. So, yeah, so just being mindful of our hours in support of that. And that doesn't mean it's open to anyone, so anyone can walk in and join and view and listen.
Nothing else?